Good evening. Welcome to this virtual event by the Greenville County Library System. I'm Rachel, the Adult Outreach and Event Coordinator, and I'm so excited that you could join us this evening. Before we get to hear from our exciting author, few announcements. First of all, have you signed up for Adult Winter Reading yet? If not, you can do that right now. Just go to greenvillelibrary.org/winterreading, and there you can sign up. You can download an activity booklet or pick up a physical one at any of our library locations. You'll fill out a bingo card with some challenges and prompts. One of those is attending a Meet the Author event, so either attending it live, like you are right now, or watching the recording. Either one counts, and you can check that box off, and you're well on your way to completing the challenge. You'll earn a completion prize and then be entered into a grand prize drawing. Many thanks to our sponsors, Swamp Rabbit Cafe and Grocery, Swamp Rabbit Hockey, Plus Plus, and Roper Mountain Science Center for making the Adult Winter Reading Challenge a reality. We also have another Meet the Author event coming up. That's coming up in a couple weeks. It's Meet the Author with Denise Williams. So if you like romance, if you like something a little steamy and a little bit funny, you'll want to check that one out too. If you're watching this as a recording, check out the playlist of Meet the Author events and you'll be able to find that on here. We're so excited that Wendy Hurd could be with us this evening. If you're one of the first several readers who has purchased one of her books, you can get a signed book plate. Be sure to email me at explore@greenvillelibrary.org, and I'll make sure that that gets to you at your local library location. So a few words about Wendy Hurd. She's the author of 2 adult thrillers, The Kill Club and Hunting Annabelle, which Kirkus Reviews praised as a diabolically plotted creep show from a writer to watch. She's Too Pretty to Burn, which Kirkus called a wild and satisfying romp in a starred review, marks her YA debut. She's a member of Sisters in Crime, International Thriller Writers, and Mystery Writers of America, and is a contributor at crimereads.com and Writer's Digest. Wendy lives in Los Angeles, California. Dead End Girls is available for pre-order, and that one is coming out in May of this year. So stay tuned for that. We are so excited that you could join us this evening. Welcome, Wendy, and thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really fun to get to meet all your folks and zoom into this. Well, thank you, Rachel. I am just so pleased to be here. I absolutely love doing library events, and whenever I do pre-order campaigns, if you keep an eye on my Twitter, my Twitterings, I'll always include library pre-orders as pre-orders. So if you request it from your local library, I always include that in, just because I think it's just as valuable to get it in the library as it is to purchase it at the store. And so if you want to follow me on Twitter at Wendy D. Hurd, you'll see me, being annoying most of the time. And then 1% of the time, you'll see me talk about that. And you can get in there and get some free swag. So that'll be great. Well, I think I'm supposed to kind of talk about myself a little bit here, which is obviously the worst thing ever, but we'll narrow it down to things you can make fun of me about later. So I'm from Los Angeles. I'm here in LA, where it's confusingly raining. We don't know what to do about this. We're completely fine if it's on fire. Like I've driven on the freeway where it's like literal fire on both sides, and we're just on our phones, we're just driving, everything's fine. But when it starts raining, we're just like, I don't know what to do. I have no idea what I'm supposed to put on my head. So this is me running into my office trying to figure out what to do with myself for this event. So I'm here from Los Angeles. I'm actually a 4th generation Angelino, if such a thing can be said to exist. My great grandparents were the first in that chain. I don't know why we didn't leave. We probably should have. I have always been obsessed with these types of darker books, always, forever, for my entire life. I remember being in elementary school in like 5th grade maybe, and staying up all night at a sleepover reading the book It by Stephen King. I was hidden behind this girl's couch in her living room because I was so terrified, but I could not stop. And that's just kind of how I always was. Always loved the darker stuff. In middle school, I discovered Edgar Allan Poe and Anne Rice, and that was just it. It was over. I always just connected with stories like that. There was something really satisfying about Seeing those darker themes play out, and especially the Gothic stuff, I just loved it. I was a voracious reader, and that's probably why I just so love libraries and doing library events, because I love the doors that that opens up for kids and for adults who are just trying to connect with books in that way. And I remember my dad giving me $1, and he lived in San Francisco, and he'd give me $1, and there's this bookstore a little ways down the street where you could get like 6 used books for $1. And so I'd go through and pick like 6 of these weird paperback novels out of there for $1, and that would keep me busy for like, I don't know, 2 days. And so yeah, so I just absolutely have always loved those darker books. As far as books I've published, my first one is called Hunting Annabelle, and this is about a young man who has been released from a psychiatric prison, and a girl goes missing on their first date, and we're trying to figure out what happened to her. Cheerful story. My next book is equally cheerful, about a young woman who joins a murdered trade club to save her younger brother. This is actually my favorite book I've ever written. It's funny. They talk about the book of your heart, and it's really funny to be like, the book of my heart is called The Kill Club. But it, I do love this book. It's my only book set in inner city LA, in low income LA, and that's the setting I grew up in. So it was my first time being able to like actually write the part of LA that I grew up in. A lot of LA gets documented. It's a very documented city, but the thing you don't see is that when you're walking down the street and there's a sort of barrier, and they're filming behind that barrier, and they bring in extras to represent people in LA, all the actual people in LA are trapped behind that barrier, and you're just trying to find, you just got to get to the bus stop, man, or you're just trying to like get to your car. And so that part of LA that's hidden behind the barrier that they don't show you, is the part of LA that I grew up in, where you definitely would not ever take a tour. In fact, I have found my childhood neighborhoods on the do not visit lists on travel advisors. So I'm like, come on now, it's not that bad, get out of here. But then they say like, don't wander around alone at night, and don't flash your diamonds. I'm like, well, yeah, of course. Then my third book that came out was my first young adult book. This is called She's Too Pretty to Burn. This is set in San Diego, and I actually think this is probably my best book, like best writing. Like it's probably, of all the 3 that have come out so far, it's probably like my highest quality book, I think. This is a Dorian Gray reimagining about an underground art scene in San Diego, and 2 girls who get kind of swept up in it, and this kind of chain of murdery heists that goes really, really dark. And so actually, really, I think if I were to judge all of my books so far objectively, I would say this is probably the one I think is the best. And then the one coming out next is Dead End Girls. This is coming out in May. And it's about, this is a very emotional book. This is about 2 girls who fake their own deaths to get away from their terrible families. And they kind of go on a Thelma and Louise type of spree across the country from Hawaii to Vegas, trying to escape their families with everyone hot on their tails. And I wrote this during the pandemic, and this book, I've always wanted to write one of those on the road books. I don't know if y'all ever read the books about the Tillermans. It was like Dicey Tillerman and her family. What was the first one called? It wasn't, I can't remember. Homecoming. And it was like a middle grade book that I probably picked up when I was 12 or so. And it was about the oldest of 4 siblings, and she has to get her siblings from Connecticut to Maryland on foot because their mom abandons them. And ever since reading that, I had just wanted to write a book about people on the road trying to make it work with nothing at hand, And I've also always really wanted to write about teenage girls. There's this type of teenage girl, she's an academic girl. She's got like extreme intelligence. And I've always been curious, thinking about what would happen if one of these girls that you see in high school, who's just like top of her debate team, top of the academic decathlon team, perfect SAT score. I mean, what if she turned her eye to crime? We would be screwed. Like she would be unstoppable. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about with the main character of this book. She's completely high achieving, high performing, and all she wants to do is fake her own death and get away from her family and kind of get revenge on them. But it's really about identity and that horrible part of life, which is that you can't run from yourself. Unfortunately, everywhere you go, there you are with you. And it's really kind of an exploration of that. It's actually a little bit less dark than some of my other books, I think, because I wrote it during the pandemic. And in 2020, man, I had a couple books I shelved that were really claustrophobic and they were really dark. And I was just like, I can't write this right now. I think I wanted to write about adventure, being out in the world, being free. We were trapped in our houses. I didn't want to write about being trapped somewhere. So yeah, I'm excited about Dead End Girls. That comes out on May 10th. It's definitely, I would say, a slightly different tone from my other books. And I think I'm really excited to see if people enjoy it. I really, really enjoyed writing that. So I'm looking forward to that one coming out. It's interesting writing books for adults and teens. Writing books for teens, I think, at least for me, the interesting parts for me are the emotional stuff. Learning who you are, fighting against these oppressive authority figures, losing control. And as a teenager, you can really self-destruct. I mean, you can just go down in flames, right? In a way that you kind of don't as an adult, because you've got to still pay that freaking rent. I mean, and so it's interesting writing about teenagers because they're in this place in their lives where they really can crash and burn in very interesting ways. And I find that super compelling to write. And I think as an adult, compelling to read because there's a little bit of longing for a time when you could do those big gestures that you can't maybe because you have kids and you just can't. And in adults, I think the things I find really fun to write about are these big plots that you can do because you're not tied down by things like, but then it's 8 o'clock and I have to go to school. I mean, teenagers are bound by things that adults aren't. And so with adults, I find it really fun that you can do these big splashy plots where your characters get taken on these insane rides. Although I did get around that in Dead End Girls by putting them on summer vacation. No, spring vacation, and then they ran away. You know what? She's Too Pretty to Burn there on summer vacation too. I was just thinking about this. I must really hate being tied down to school. I'm writing about that right now, and it's really annoying. I'm like, fine, they have to go to school the next day. I ditched a lot. So maybe it shows in my writing. I got expelled for that. So I also like the fact that in an adult, you can go darker. I mean, look, there's some things I do to my adult main characters I just would not do to my teenage main characters. I mean, come on. It's horrible, the things I do to them. And sexier, and you can really explore. You have a lot of choices as an adult that a teenage doesn't have, a lot of options. And so it's fun with adults to kind of go big with those things. So yeah, I think I definitely will always write both adult and young adult because I get such different things out of them. And it took some time to learn how to switch back and forth between those voices. It was really quite difficult to pull so much emotion out of the young adult stuff. And then in the adult, it's more like pull so much plot out. So going back and forth and writing two books at the same time and going back and forth between two books, it takes some time to learn how to like flip the switch and go into these two different characters. I think I will always write. People ask a lot if I'll always write in this genre: thriller, mystery, suspense, crime fiction. I don't know. I mean, I think I have there's so much variation in those genres. There's so much difference between like a thriller and a noir and a domestic suspense and like a legal thriller. I feel like there's still so much room to move around in there. So I haven't felt constricted by it yet. There's some things I found really interesting along the way. I was researching Hunting Annabelle, my first one, which has a lot of psychology in it because the main character has been diagnosed with a couple of mental illnesses, not the least schizophrenia. And so I had to do just a ton of research. And so one thing I learned from a doctor of psychology in that process, she mentioned this when I was interviewing her. She said that books like this serve a really interesting function for people who have anxiety in particular. And that for people who have anxiety, there's a stress cycle that the human body engages in. And that stress cycle kind of goes like this. And part of that is the ramping up of cortisol and the heart pounding anxiety stress piece that wakes us up in the middle of the night, that woke me up last night at 1 a.m. for no good reason. And we get stuck in it. If we have anxiety, our body doesn't just process the cortisol through and move out of the stress cycle. Someone with anxiety gets stuck there. And one of the ways we can get unstuck is by going through something that will take us through the stress cycle. So, for example, going on a roller coaster to where you go up and down and up and down and you scream, but then it calms down and it ends. And then you step off and you feel that huge sense of relief and happiness and peace that like breath wishes out of you. That's what our body is looking for out of these anxiety cycles. And she said when she has people with anxiety, she'll recommend that they go through things that will take them through a stress cycle, like a roller coaster or a scary movie, where it will resolve. You'll go through all the scariness and then it will resolve. So going through something that will help take your body through that cycle. And scary books or books with any sort of a heart pounding element to them are going to take you through that cycle and help you get to the end. Since I've always struggled with anxiety, that really helped me understand why I cannot put a book down in the middle. If I'm going to pick up a book that's going to be like plotty and maybe scary, and it's going to be like, what happened next? I have to keep reading until it is over. Same thing with like a season. Like when I got on Yellow Jackets, I didn't sleep for like 2 days. I have to know what happens, you know? And so that helped me understand where people whose bodies struggle to come out of that stress cycle, these types of books can be real helpful and very therapeutic, actually. And it helped me understand why some of us might gravitate toward those darker themes because our bodies are actually craving that release from the cycle. So that's something I really love about this genre that I feel like is maybe lesser known. I also love that it's a chance to explore that what happens if, you know, we think about and hear about these dark things, but what happens if that happened to me? Like, what would that be like? Books are so much better than TV in this way, where they put us into people's skin. And it's not like on TV where you're watching things happen and you're an observer and you're really compelled and engaged, but books actually force you to walk through the story as a person, especially if you're reading in first person. So you're kind of like forced to be a hero, forced to be a villain. And I think it is really interesting to put people in the skin of those they might not choose to be. For example, an anti-hero or a main character with a lot of problems. And I have found that it does make some people really uncomfortable when you put them in the skin of someone that they don't like. They find this person unlikable or unsympathetic, and they're forced to read the story from their perspective. It really upsets people. And I think it's because it forces them to live in that skin for a minute in a way that they don't like, you know, that they don't want to be that person. And I find that reaction almost as interesting as the exercise in the first place. You know, Megan Abbott said some people like to look under the rock. She's like, I'm just one of those people who, if there's a rock, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to look underneath it. And I definitely think those of us who are attracted to this type of book are the type of people who look under the rock. So as an example, I'm a big hiker. I was on the Griffith Park trails on Sunday, and there's a little snake. And it was either a gopher snake or a baby rattlesnake. I see both up there all the time. So one might say you could just keep walking and ignore the snake. But I have to know if it's a gopher snake or a baby rattlesnake. So I have to get close to it. I have to move it off the path. I'm worried about its safety. I don't want someone to step on it and kill it on purpose. People are mean. Also, if it's a rattlesnake, I don't want it to bite a dog, something else I'm always worried about. So if I see a rattlesnake, I'm like, I'm getting you off the path. And you just got to kind of shoo them. They usually just shoo. This little guy like coiled up and he was like, which was pretty funny. He was a gopher snake, it turned out. And I learned something about gopher snakes, that sometimes they pretend to be rattlesnakes and they fake rattlesnake behavior for their own protection. Interesting. But anyway, I think it's that personality where do you look under the rock? Do you investigate the snake? Or do you just keep walking? And I think those of us who look under the rock or who investigate the snake are the same type of people who are like, I don't know, what if there was a serial killer? You know, like we're that curiosity for those hidden things and for that maybe hidden side to mankind that is uncomfortable but interesting, and maybe something that is in me and I don't know it. Like I need to know, I need to explore, I need to go closer, even if what I'm going to go closer to and see is a little dangerous or like a little uncomfortable. So as far as writing craft, I I would be remiss if I didn't do a little bit of writing craft talk in my last 10 minutes or so of my talking time. People love to hear about how you craft suspense and like what are the secrets? Like how does the sausage get made? Like the magician tricks, like how do you surprise people? So I tried to put together some things. I was like, what are my main things that I've kind of learned along the way of writing in this genre? So first of all, I have learned that pacing is really important. Nobody waits in line for a long, slow roller coaster. I remember trying to explain this to a guy who he wanted to swap manuscripts with me. And I was like, your thriller is 180,000 words long. That's like 600 pages. It's like the longest roller coaster ever. It's like getting on a roller coaster and it just goes 5 miles an hour, like real slow for like an hour. No one wants that. And so I do think that pacing is important. And one of the ways I deal with that is I use Save the Cat. I know a lot of people do, and you don't have to. I personally just find it helpful to have a beat sheet where I've got like a little bit of a roadmap. You know, I know that like here in the stories about when things this are supposed to happen. There's a new Save the Cat called Save the Cat Writes for TV. This one's really good. I like this one a lot. There's another one, I just gave mine away. It's called Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Excellent. I also like the original, good old Save the Cat. And that's been really helpful. I also find this book, Anatomy of Story, really helpful. Just kind of breaks the story into pieces and, you know, kind of helps you go through the different parts of it. And they do it in like 22 easy steps. I'm like, oh, so simple. But there's some things in there that I have really taken with me along the way. And between those two, I like to do a 4-act structure. So basically I divide the book into quarters and do act 1, first half of act 2, second half of act 2, act 3. And then each of these has a pretty, yeah, there's like always should be something that happens about halfway through. That's like a little, they call it a pinch point. And I could go on about that forever and I won't torture you with that because I'm sure some people here are not trying to write books. Although I do have a comment asking about Save the Cat a little bit, explain. Save the Cat basically breaks your book up into pieces and gives you what they call a beat sheet, which is basically like, here are the different story beats. Here's an example of a common famous story beat, the climax. We have all heard of this. That's a story beat in Save the Cat. It happens in act 3. So it's kind of knowing where these different beats are supposed to happen. Another famous one is called the inciting event. It's the thing that kicks off the plot. Like if the book is about a mummy, finding the mummy is the inciting event. It's whatever kicks it off. It always happens in the beginning. And so Save the Cat breaks it down into those different pieces and screenwriters follow it like to the page, like on page 3 of the screenplay, that's where the inciting event is. On page 9, that's where it breaks into act 2. I mean, they don't play, they follow it like by the book. In books, we tend to be a little more flexible because we have so much world building to do, and every story, certain things take longer to fill out, right? But give or take, the midpoint is the halfway point of the book. And there's usually a flow. For example, you start the story, there's a kicking off event. First half of act 2 is all the fun and games, the exciting parts of the story. Then there's a midpoint. Oh my God, this changes everything. And then the second half of act 2 gets kind of like darker and darker. Oh my God, the bad guys are closing in. And then you have the all is lost. The hero's lost his mission. And then act 3, exciting climax, and then resolution. But there's a lot of Save the Cat resources online. I have found it very helpful in focusing my energies, just having somewhat of an idea about where to put stuff in the story. Counterpoint, I really like this book called Craft in the Real World by Matthew Salesses, I think he pronounces it. And this is a book kind of challenging our current thoughts about plot and structure. And so that's why I think it's good to talk about these things side by side, because Save the Cat is a very Western, you know, I think it might even go back to the Greek plays, the 3-act structure. And so it's really nice to read a book that talks about other worldviews, for example, Asian literature and literature from around the world that doesn't come from that same perspective, and the value of those types of stories, and that there are other ways to structure a plot that will keep readers engaged that aren't the traditional Western 3-act structure. So that's why I like this one a lot too. And so, yeah, so I tend to work, these are the things I use to try to keep my pacing up and exciting. I also really try to think about the promises I make a reader when I've created a setting. For example, if I tell you I'm writing a book about two girls faking their own death, um, you're like, that's only going to be interesting if it starts to go wrong. Like in Thelma and Louise, it's fun when they're out on the road having a good time. It's more interesting when things start to fall apart. So I know I'm going to have to make sure that when this starts to fall apart, this better be interesting. Also, I'm like, they're going to fake their own death and they're going to travel 2 miles and end up in the same place. No, they're going to go on a journey, right? Like I'm promising you that there's going to be some kind of an adventure, some kind of a journey. So like whatever structure that I've chosen, whatever log line I've given you, I'm trying to also be aware of what promises I've made you. And I want to try to go all in on those so that you don't come away disappointed. I think about that a lot. There's also a famous premise called the loaded guns. Whereas if you give a character a weapon, he better use it at some point. You're not going to have a guy just carrying a gun in his holster through the whole book and never see him shoot it. So it's like, what loaded guns have I put in here? And then authors are always talking about reveals and twists. Like, what's a reveal? What's a twist? A reveal is something that we dropped clues in. You could have picked up on it if you were clever. And a twist is something where it's like, I took this train, I pulled it off the tracks and I turned it left. You had no idea. There was no clues for you. I just like changed the rules of the game. And that twist is like in the famous Gone Girl middle of the book twist, where suddenly it's not what you thought. So yeah, so those are some suspense writing things that I can share. Yeah, and that's, I mean, I could go into more craft, but I don't want to take too much time with that if we don't have a ton of writers in the audience. So maybe I'll save some craft tips for the end if I sense from our Q&A that we do have a lot of aspiring writers or current authors. Maybe I'll save some more craft tips for the end just in case and open it up for some Q&A if that sounds good.
That sounds.
Rachel, do you want to curate and read, or do you want me to go through the chat myself?
No, I will curate for you. I've also made
Cool.
it. If anyone would like to unmute themselves, you can do that at this point too. And you can ask Wendy a question directly. While you're thinking of your other questions, we've had some come in the chat. The first one is, how do you stay motivated while writing?
So I have a job, like I have a whole life and it's tough. So full disclosure, I have to write before work. I wake up at 5. I write for like 2 hours every morning, and then I write on days off, weekends, and when my daughter has a play date. So it can be tough to stay motivated. It can be exhausting, honestly. There's a lot I feel like I've traded for this writing career. I mean, there's a lot of things that I haven't done that I have had to say no to because I was writing. That said, I think the thing that motivates me is just a love for it. I mean, I love it. I love writing in coffee shops. I love writing in wine bars. I love writing at home. I love writing in airports. I think it's just that compulsion to live inside the story and to tell that story. I just cannot, I can't not do it. So it's that when I'm thinking about that choice I've made, when I'm waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, I'm thinking, okay, well, my other choice is not to tell the story, but that's never the option that I want to choose. So yeah, I think I stay motivated by just having a true love for it, even though a lot of times I'm like, I don't understand. The last thing I want to do is write, but I want to write. I don't know how to explain this dichotomy. Like I have to put like a gun to my own head and be like, just write the chapter. I'm like, I don't want to. It seems hard. But then I want to write. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. I don't want to, but I want to. It's very confusing.
It's sort of like you want to see how the story ends, and so you want to keep working on the story.
Mm-hmm.
Another writing question that we have. So writing in this dark genre takes you through a stress cycle, but does that always work? Do you ever actually wind up scaring yourself?
Oh my God, yes. I have scared myself. There's which one? This one coming out. There is a shark scene. I'm not scared of snakes, but I'm very scared of sharks. I'm from Los Angeles and there are sharks in the ocean. I'm telling you there are. They have done drones over there and they've seen great whites all over the place. and I wrote a shark scene, and I was like literally in this Airbnb in Arizona. I remember writing this shark scene, like scared. Um, Although I would say it is much less scary to write it than to read it because you're in control of the story. And so you've decided what's going to happen. And so you're so concerned with the technical elements of it. Like if it's a fight scene where the main character is trying to get out of it, you're like, oh my God, how do I really make this feel real? And so I think you're more concerned with the technical aspects than your own experience of it. Yeah, because some of the darker stuff I've written has not bothered me at all. I have killed a character where it's made me really cry for a long time. Like I remember crying in the car. I'm not a crier, like, so it was a big deal. Um, yeah, so I would say definitely I can think of a few shining scenes, but overall it's much less scary than reading someone else's.
That's fascinating. Yeah, when you were talking about the snakes, I thought, no, she's not scared of anything, but
Sharks.
sharks.
There's no, where's the anti-venom for a great white shark bite? There is, you're just in the water. Like that's it. It's over. It's like a bear. Things to be scared of are that like you don't want, it's like it is a swimming hungry bear that wants to kill you. That's how I feel about great white sharks.
I'm gonna remember that, a swimming hungry bear. Another question that's come in the chat is, do you write short stories? Are you even interested in writing short stories?
I have a short story actually on my website. I have two. I have one that's like a game. It's like an interactive game where like it's like choose your own adventure. It's called Choose Your Own Dead Venture, where you read like a page and then you select what you want to do and you click it and it takes you into the next one and then it takes you to the end. There's all these different endings. That's part of my newsletter. So if you go to my website, wendyherd.com, and you sign up for my newsletter, it'll send you like free that one. And then the other one is called Our True Crime. I really had to force myself to write that because I wanted to have something to give away with my newsletter. And the funny thing about that is I never use my newsletter. Like I'm the worst. I'm the opposite of spamming you. I forget to tell you things. I do like the opposite of what you're afraid of when you sign up for something and someone like emails you every day. All like a book will be almost coming out. I'll be like, oh crap, I have to email people. So I don't love writing short stories. If I fall enough in love with an idea, I tend to want to build it into a whole thing. Although there have been a few ideas I've had where I've thought to myself, see, here's an example of an idea you should use for a short story. It doesn't have a lot of legs. It's just kind of a quirky, fun little conceit, but it doesn't have a whole plot behind it. So I should, and I would like to, but I really have not. Only done it a few times.
Okay. Just a reminder, if anyone wants to unmute themselves or turn on their video, feel free to do that. No one's going to do that. I'm going to keep asking some questions in the chat.
No one wants to.
I know it's can be scary to be on camera, but
I know, trust me.
How important is a social media presence for reaching readers? You sort of touched on that with your e-newsletter.
Oh my God. So this is what they say. Only do what you enjoy. Only do what you love. Okay, fine. So I hate all of it. Well, no. So you have to have some social media, really. I think, but then they're like, no. And then they'll list some really fancy author, like Stephen King doesn't have social media. You're like, well, he's Stephen King. He doesn't have to. Like Dean Koontz doesn't have social media. Okay. I don't know. I have found that it's valuable, especially in making connections with other writers, if nothing else. Like Twitter's been really good for that. Instagram, I'm always a little confused by because some people are like very how do I put this? Their lives seem very photogenic and interesting. And so I'm like, okay, your Instagram account makes sense. How is everything in your house color coordinated? Why does your house look like that? But for those of us who are just kind of normal people, we feel confused by Instagram because we're like, what do you want me to take a picture of? Just like me sitting like this again and again and again. Yeah, I think a lot of us are confused. Like now we're supposed to be on TikTok, which I have a 12-year-old daughter and I love to tease her and be like, I'm gonna talk tick. And she's like, please stop. I like to always pretend to forget like the actual name for things just to humiliate her a little bit. and be like the dorky mom. It's my favorite thing. I told her, what if I get one of those dancing TikTok accounts where I like twerk? And she's like, I just saw her like go pale. Um, so we're supposed to have social media and we're supposed to do it all really well and market ourselves, but we're not supposed to have to, but we kind of have to. Um, so any author you ask will probably have a different answer on that, but I think there's a little bit of a deep confusion in all of us about exactly what the expectation is. Yeah. So we just have fun with it and tweet about stupid things and Instagram pictures of our dogs and hope for the best.
No, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, TikTok is the future right now. So you're going to have to disappoint your daughter and do it at some point.
I hate it.
All right. Another question that's come in the chat. I kind of want to leave time if anyone wants to unmute themselves, but did you experience any setbacks in getting your work published? And if so, what were they?
There's for a long time, the first thing that came up when you Googled me was this article I did. I was interviewed, and in the interview, she asked me how many queries I had submitted before I got published. And I said 500. And she was like, what? I was like, I don't know, man. I wrote for a really long time. So the first thing that came up when you Googled me was like, Wendy Hurd submits 500 queries. And it's like so pathetic. I was like, God. But yeah, it took me years and years. I think Hunting Annabelle was my 7th book that I ever finished. And I started writing right out of high school, and I went for many years before I actually got a book deal. Yeah.
So there's hope, aspiring writers.
Oh yeah. It takes a long time. I think 7 is actually the most common book to get published, your 7th.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So never fear. If you've got more writing questions, of course, keep those coming in the chat. Otherwise, we'll still keep plowing through some of these questions we've got. When did you know you wanted to be a writer? I know you mentioned you started writing after high school, but when did you know?
I would say growing up, I was obsessed with books, completely obsessed. To be honest, becoming an author myself never really occurred to me. Yeah, I don't know how to explain that, except that I did grow up poor, and there is a certain amount of like things that seem fancy or things that seem too good to be true. You just don't consider them. I mean, it's really a kind of a more survival mentality. So when I was growing up, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was always trying to think of like something more practical. I started working when I was 13 in food service, and it never occurred to me to try to do something that seemed impractical like that until I got into my teenage years. And then I started thinking about, okay, there's people who write and there's people who do music and stuff like that. Yeah, so I would say it didn't really occur to me as an option until I was, getting toward the end of my high school years, and it had become clear at that point that I had a proclivity. But even then, I think I wrote a novel, tried to sell it, got discouraged, and walked away for years. And I was just trying to make a living, right? Like trying to get through college and trying to pay the bills. I always had multiple jobs. I was paying my way through college. I was working at like Trader Joe's and all these different coffee shops and restaurants. I always had multiple jobs. And so, yeah, it was something I just did on the side. And then eventually, the books started coming together a little more. And then I thought, what if I read books on how to do this and learned how to be an actual writer? And that was after my like 3rd book, where I had tried to sell it and didn't work, that I started Googling things like books on how to write books and reading them. And amazingly, a few years after that was when I started writing books that were actually like coherent, sort of.
Sort of. All right, that's great. Okay, another question that's come in is, what is the most important lesson you have learned in your writing career?
Okay, I know this one because I take this one with me all the time. This changed my life. So I was a single mom when I wrote Hunting Annabelle. It was my daughter was little, and I was struggling financially, and I had broken all the bones in my body. It felt like, no, I had broken my hip and my wrist on the same side. So I had a crutch. I couldn't push a wheelchair. and I couldn't use a second crutch. I literally had one crutch, and that is what I got. So I could either army crawl one elbowed across the ground, or I could hobble on my one crutch. And that was when I rewrote Hunting Annabelle, and I connected with a lot of like maybe more darkness in that moment because it was a really tough time. A small child, if you can imagine, like she was like 4, and I had one side of my body functional for 3 months, and I was working full time, and I had to take time off work. It was awful. But in those moments, I learned a couple things. First of all, I learned that that emotional authenticity is what matters. Like getting yourself to a raw place where you're writing stuff that's so honest it feels embarrassing. Or you're embarrassed to show this to people. If you're not embarrassed to show it to people, then you didn't get real enough. Um, it should feel like showing someone your diary. It's embarrassing, humiliating to have your aunt tell you she read it. If it doesn't feel like that for me, it tells me that I didn't go deep enough. And then I also learned through those years, I used to drive in my car in those years, and I would tell myself, I'm either going to get published or I'm going to die trying. Something about that I found really satisfying. So if even it takes the next 70 years, I'm going to just do this. And if I don't succeed, I will have died trying. And something about the stubbornness of that, when it finally worked, I realized that that's how stubborn you have to be sometimes. When you set your sights on something, you have to be that stubborn and that unwilling to take no for an answer, to where it can propel you for a decade until you get any success at all. And so that feeling of kind of clawing your way through it really taught me a lot. And I think I've taken that into other parts of my life too. So I have a lot. I really thank this journey from writing for helping me learn that lesson, that you can do a lot more than you think you can. You just have to be willing to be that persistent.
That's really interesting advice about sort of bearing so much of yourself and making it almost embarrassing to share.
Yeah.
I want to leave a little time in case someone wants to unmute. Okay, I'm going to keep going. If anyone wants to use the raise hand function as well, you can do that, and then I can call on you. All right, let's see what the next one is. What comes first in the writing process for you? Do you sketch out a plot first and then the characters? Or do you start off with a character idea? What's typical for you?
I think people start where they're comfortable. And each book is kind of different. But for me, I'm more comfortable in plot than character and emotion, and it's more comfortable in that place. So I tend to start with plot, but I have other people who tend to start with character because that's their happy place. So I think for anybody, it can start with a setting even. It can start with a what if question. What if vampires were nice and sparkly, right? And what if they were pedophiles? These questions about, what if this, what if that, that can start an entire book, right? So I think for everyone, it's a little different. I tend to start with like a concept, a big plot concept, like a teenage girl fakes her own death. I've always wanted to research how to fake your own death, like for real. So I've always thought that would be really fun to write about. So that's where Dead End Girls came from. Especially teenagers, because I'm like, that'd be hard if you're like 17 trying to pretend to be like 18 or 19 and faking all this stuff. So yeah, I think for me it's plot, but that's definitely not the only place to start. Some people start with a scene, actually joking about vampires, but Stephenie Meyer started with the scene of them laying in the meadow. That's where Twilight started, with the dream she had for that. There's no right way to start.
Okay. I love that. So whatever works for your writing process, that's what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. All right, another question. I really love your cover art. How much input do you get to have on what the book looks like?
I'm sorry. It's just that we don't get that much input, except sometimes they send us something where we're like, oh God, not that. Other than that, sometimes, okay, I've been pretty lucky. My young adult team has always been wonderful. I love my publisher, and they do send me concepts and ask how I feel. I'm actually a visual artist. I have a degree in studio art painting. So it's very hard for me when I don't get any say at all, because I'll be like, eh. To be fair though, the thing I have to remember, my agent is so great about explaining this. that your covers are packaging, you know? It's like a cereal box is packaging. It tells a person what kind of cereal's inside of it, who should buy it. So the cover needs to talk about the genre, what kind of book it is, the vibe, the mood, the genre, and who should buy it. More so than it should talk about what I think is cool, what type of covers I enjoy. So I really try to separate myself from that. And when they send me a cover where I'm like, I hate it.com, I really try to understand where where are we coming from here. I have to be honest though, I feel like I've been pretty lucky. Um, there's only been a couple times along the way that I haven't enjoyed a concept, but it's always gotten resolved. Yeah, I can't think of a single one. I'm looking at them all right now. I can't think of a single moment where I haven't felt happy with the way the cover came out. So I think I've been lucky. I've had friends who have really hated their covers, and I think that would suck. I would feel so sad about that. You work so hard that the cover's almost the most exciting part when you get that cover and you see what it's finally going to look like. So yeah, they sometimes they'll send you like 4 sketches, or 4 like very basic renderings, and they'll say, which direction do you like? Sometimes they literally are pencil sketches that a designer has done. And sometimes, like with the Kill Club, they just sent me the finished cover. That's it. I liked it though. It worked, but like, you know, so it depends on the publisher and the team how much input you get. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Other authors that we've had speak also have mentioned that they don't get that much influence in the final outcome, but
People don't always know that we don't always pick our titles. If they don't like our title, they'll change it. And you can have input, and you're always a part of the process, but they will just reject your title, and you do have to just change it if they tell you to. I've actually heard from people that certain large booksellers, to remain unnamed, have changed their titles.
whoa.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's interesting. People think that authors always pick their titles, but we don't. Actually, the only title I've come up with on my own is Hunting Annabelle. And the other ones were all a democratic process between me and my agent and my editor, with sending ideas, lists and lists of names back and forth, which is usually how it goes.
That's really interesting.
Hmm.
Gosh.
I know.
Oh, we've got a couple more questions coming in the chat. Okay, who are your favorite authors or greatest influences?
Okay. Well, I don't know. That's so tough. I mean, people ask you what's your favorite book, and you've suddenly never read a book before in your life, right? Um, and my reading as a young person was so weird because I was always trying to just buy these 25-cent used paperbacks. So I read such strange things. I will say in the 90s, no, maybe this is the early aughts, Banana Yoshimoto was a Japanese author who came out with a book called NP and a book called Kitchen. I think Kitchen came first. And they were pretty small, maybe like a little slimmer than usual. And she was a 20-something-year-old author. And she got taken really seriously, and her books got taken really seriously. And that was the first time that was actually when I was like, oh, you and I could write a book and they might actually like put it into a book. Like it had never occurred to me that a young woman such as myself could do that, and that they might actually take that book seriously. Um, if you can imagine, you know, it was only men that they really taught in school, and it just didn't occur to me that a young woman, especially a young woman who hadn't been to college yet, that her books could be published and read by people. So it wasn't until I got out of high school and started finding my own books written by women that I understood that this was actually something that happened. So yeah, so I would say she was probably the biggest influence, and also she had a real beauty of language. She writes really sparsely, but she really digs into descriptions nicely when it needs to be done. Like she'll kind of fly you through some moments and then sit in one moment and really go through it. I love that style. So her books really, I would say, influenced me a lot. And then of course all the, you know, evil little books that I read by Anne Rice and etc.
Well, that's a great segue to the next question. Anne Rice, what's your favorite scary movie?
I'm kind of bad with scary movies. The imagery really gets stuck in my head. Um, my favorite scary anything is now Yellow Jackets. Have you guys been watching it? Oh my God. Have you seen it, Rachel?
I haven't seen it yet, but everyone has told me to watch it.
Oh my God. It is like mind blowing. Seriously, new favorite writing on TV ever. It's incredible. Um, the just the writing, the character development, the way that they handle the two time frames, three, incredible. So that's my new favorite scary anything.
I see some people in the chat on the list.
It's so good. I signed up for Showtime just so I could watch it and then rewatch it.
All right, well, that's high praise, everybody.
Is I don't even know if you'd call it scary. It's disturbing, but I don't know if you'd say scary.
That I can handle a little more. I personally have a hard time with like jump scares. Too many
Same.
of
I
those.
can't. Same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds promising.
Yeah.
All right, another question. This is from an aspiring writer.
Okay.
Looking to write novels. My question is, when finding a publisher, do you need a fully completed novel, or can you present a chapter or an outline describing what will be written?
That's a great question. So for a first-time novelist, you need to bring a whole thing. You need, and you know what? And I'm actually reading an adult novel that's going to go out on sub right now, because I'm what's called off contract, meaning I completed my contract with my adult publisher, and now I'm going to move on, and I'm going to try to submit a book and try to get it published, but I'm not sure who to. It's called going on submission or going on submission wide. Anytime you're on submission wide, it's often considered best practice to have a full manuscript, especially in these types of genres where the ending really matters. For example, in science fiction fantasy, you'll see more people, once they're established, never as a first-time writer, novelist, a debut author. Sometimes you'll see first established science fiction fantasy authors taking things out on proposal, is what that's called. You always have like the first 3 to 5 chapters, a full synopsis, a pitch, and like a one-page write-up about the book. So when you're selling to the publisher you already have book deals going with, you can often sell that way on proposal. When you're selling to a new publisher, except science fiction fantasy, and I don't know that this is true for everybody, because if you're a big name, you can do whatever you want, but it's probably considered best practice to go ahead and write a full book if you want to be the most attractive candidate for that kind of job, if you're picturing it like that, that you can be. But especially for a first-time novelist, you're going to need a full manuscript.
Okay, that's great to know. I'm sure the writers are appreciating that.
The only exception I will say is if you're nonfiction. Nonfiction people, if you already have like a following, let's say you're kind of like a famous yoga teacher and you want to write a book about your experiences as a yoga teacher, in that case, you can probably get away with proposal.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of differences between the fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, and I'm no expert. I can only speak to my own experiences.
Right. We only have a few minutes left, so if anybody has been thinking of a question and they want to say it out loud, now is your chance to do so. Everyone's
They don't
shy.
want to unmute themselves. They don't want to show their faces.
That's all right. Right, we can probably take another question or two as well in the chat. If anybody's got anything that you'd like to ask, this rare opportunity to get to speak to an author one-on-one. So yeah, one question that you've talked about a little bit, but they're asking, how do you get past the worst writer's block?
Whew, I've gotten it. I get it really bad. I get it terribly. So I finally learned that I get writer's block, but then I realized later it was always because something in the plot wasn't working. Something wasn't working. I had taken a wrong turn. So instead of getting mad about it now, I take it as an opportunity to try to unpack what's like, try to really work through what's not working. So I'll stop and I'll go back through the last few things I've written. I'll start writing down. Sometimes I write a summary of each scene. That might help me get unstuck. I'll look at my beat sheet and I'll ask myself if I think this feels like a midpoint, but for some reason it's not working like that. And then I'll take it to my writer friends and I'll say, I'm stuck, help me. And then I'll kind of talk it through with my writer friends. So I try to trust my instincts and say, if I'm stuck, there's something wrong, but what's wrong, and try to diagnose it. And that's helped me a lot to not be mad at myself for being stuck, but to try to take it as my gut instinct is telling me something. I need to listen.
Oh, that's great that you're telling yourself subconsciously to deal with something. I see we have someone who I think is ready to ask a question. Go right ahead.
JC,
Hi.
so good to see your face. JC and I
Oh,
know each other on social media a little bit.
yeah. Yeah,
Hey, good to see
you've read,
you.
yeah, you've read some of my pages way back when.
No,
So,
I remember. How's it going?
oh my God, submission. I'm in the submission process. Oh,
Ah,
yay. So just
it's
waiting.
named it's named well. It is named
Yes.
well.
Yes. So patience and perseverance, all the things. So,
Mm-hmm.
no, I was curious, like, you had said that you find time to write like early in the morning and things like that. Do you ever find days where you just like take time off from all of that and just like mental health wise? Because I
Yeah.
personally struggle with that. So I was just curious.
Yeah, man. I mean, yeah, there's sometimes I just need to take a little break. It's too much. It's too hard to go every single day. Yeah, but I find that after I do that, I can get even more done. So it's okay. It's okay. You're gonna lose, just like it's like with working out, right? Like you go every day, and then there's gonna be a week where, I don't know, you trip and fall and your knee hurts and you can't work out that week, or you get a little cold, or you just have a lot of stuff in the evenings, but then you come back, it's the same thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know. It's hard, that grind, grind.
That's a great
Mm-hmm.
question. Thank you.
Thanks for hosting too, by the way. I'm actually in South Carolina, so you guys are not that far from us, which is
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
Yay. Not
love
Wendy, but Rachel.
Yeah, I am
Of
very
course.
far from you.
I know, I know.
Yeah,
Thank
the
you guys.
magic of Zoom brings everybody
I
close together.
know.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's so good to see you, JC. I'm so glad to see your face. Is that your wall, by the way? It's really cool. Like wallpaper. She has like a raw wood
It's
backdrop.
yeah, it's a decal.
Really
It looks
cool.
yeah, it looks like wood paneling, but it's a decal and it's from Amazon. Totally recommend.
Love it. Yeah, it looks amazing.
Say that'd be good for a studio wall even.
Mm-hmm. I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
hello.
Yeah, take some ideas from you.
That's right.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to ask a question before we wrap up this evening? Now's the time. Now.
All right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Wendy. And of course,
Thank you for having me.
yes, if you want to get more information about Wendy's books or any other information, wendyhurd.com. I put that in the chat earlier. And if you're watching the recording, that is in the video description as well. So make sure that you pre-order that book coming up and let me know, and we'll send you that signed book plate as well. So we are so grateful to Wendy for that. Thank you for sharing your time and talent and writing tips. I think
Thank you.
yeah, we've all learned so much, and you're an invaluable resource, of course, someone who is a success story, helping us out, those of us who are interested in writing. So thank you for that too.
Well, come find me on Twitter or Instagram or wherever and keep me posted. I'd love to hear if anybody has any more questions that come up later, or if you just, want to tell me if you ended up writing that book. I'd be really curious to hear it. And JC, keep me posted.
That's fantastic. Yes, definitely. So follow her on all those social media handles. You can also follow Greenville County Library on our social media handles as well. I'll post that. You can see that in this recorded video too. And again, you have attended a Meet the Author event, so you are ticking off a box on that winter reading challenge. So make sure that you are signed up for that as well. We just really want to encourage all of you to enjoy some personal reading time during the winter, the cold months. Stay inside, stay cozy, and read. And then also, of course, to use library resources. If you are an aspiring writer, we do have a special reading list specifically for aspiring writers as well. Besides Wendy's great suggestions earlier this evening, we've got a longer list there too. So thank you so much for coming to this event, and we look forward to seeing you at another virtual Meet the Author event soon. Have a great night, everybody, and thank you to Wendy.